Are you living and working abroad in a country you didn't grow up in? If not, have you ever thought about what it might be like to be immersed in a different culture and language for a long period of time? In this podcast, we talk about the advantages and the drawbacks of life as an expat in Spain. And we'll give you some advice about how to make life a bit easier for yourself as an immigrant. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hi, I'm Reza.
And my name's Craig.
And with more than 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. So Craig, it's been a while since we've met in person. How are you?
I'm very well. I know it's really good to see you again. And for regular listeners who know this because I've been telling them in the newsletter. By the way, if you want to get our newsletter, go to inglespodcast.com and you'll see a space to give your email address and we'll send you our newsletter. But you've been in Belfast. How was it? Tell us. Any interesting stories like maybe going to the pub and missing the last bus and having to walk a few kilometers home?
Yes. So I haven't seen Craig, but I did tell him that story. Yes. How silly can you get? Well, I'll tell you how silly you can get. I was supposed to get a bus home, a special late night bus, and it just never appeared. And there was a few other people waiting for it. It just didn't appear. And I had a few drinks. I should explain that. That does not help the situation because it clouded my thinking. I wasn't thinking as well as I normally would. And I thought, well, I know this city very well. We'll just have to get a taxi down. We'll walk round to this place where there's a taxi office. So I did that. There's no taxi office. Okay, well, we'll just walk a bit further to this other taxi office going in my direction. That's not there either. Okay, well, this is getting a bit annoying, but we'll just walk a little bit further where there's this really busy taxi office. But no, there wasn't. It turns out that since COVID, basically 80% of taxi offices, taxi ranks as well, have disappeared in Belfast. There are very, very, very few physical spaces where you can go to get a taxi.
So at that time of night, there was no way for you to get home?
Well, I could have just looked at my mobile and done it that way. Only, of course, the battery had gone in the mobile. Isn't it classic? But then what I should have done, but as I say, drink had clouded my thought. What I should have done is just gone into one of many, many hotels, and there they normally call for a taxi for you. Just go in, call, get a drink if necessary, and they call you a taxi. But I wasn't thinking straight. That's what I should have done. Because you see, in Belfast, here's the funny thing. Taxis are not allowed to stop in the street. So taxis pass me, and as I do in Valencia all the time, I stuck my arm out for them to stop. But they wouldn't. They strictly observe the law, because if they don't, they get into big, big, big trouble. It's more than their job's worth. They strictly adhere to the law. They're not allowed to stop if you flag them in the street. They can only go to addresses or a few, very, very few designated ranks, which only do designated routes.
What's a rank?
A rank is like a place in the street specifically for taxis where you don't have to call them in advance. You can just go there. But from those ranks, they only do certain routes. And my house is not along one of those routes. So I thought, well, walk a bit down this road, which is on the way to my house. I realize now I'm going to have to walk about a mile and a half or two to get to the next taxi rank. And my house is 6 or 7 miles away. But okay, we'll walk it.
That's about 10 kilometers.
10 kilometers. That taxi rank wasn't there either. Or the next one. So it got to the point I realized, okay, I'm walking home. I have to.
So what time did you get home?
About 2:30 in the morning. Having left at about 11:45. Yeah, about 2.5 hours.
The evils of drink, my
Yeah.
friend. So, but the family's okay. Everyone's okay. Your mum's okay back home.
Yes, and above all, I enjoyed the weather because it was cool, grey, cloudy, not much sun. You might think, hold on, that sounds horrible. No, no, no. If you've been in Valencia being boiled all summer, you are only too happy for some cool, grey weather. It was bliss. That means it was like heaven.
Well, I suffered here under the August heat in Valencia, but now it's mostly over. And it's really good to see you and get podcasting with you again. And first this week, we have a voice message from, I think it's Sheniz is the pronunciation. Now, you've lived in Turkey. Is that how you would pronounce her name, Sheniz?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm reading her name, which she's written Seniz. And as you know, listeners, English doesn't have its own written accents, whereas other languages do. As you know, Spanish has accents, French, German has umlauts, the two dots and all of that. If I saw this name written and it was Turkish language, I would say Seniz. And maybe if the S has something added to it, like a cedilla underneath, like in Catalan, it might be Sheniz or Sheniz. I'm not sure.
Well, let's find out.
Hi everyone, I'm Şeniz from Turkey. I have been listening to your podcasts for a long time and really enjoy it. After listening your last podcast, I decided to send you a voice message. As you mentioned before, American English is quite common. I exposure to American accent during my education. After a while, I noticed that I can't understand British accent. When I watched a British film, I had to use subtitles. And last year, I decided to take some Cambridge exams. The exam that I have to pass is occupational English test, and it comes from Australia. That means the accent they speak is between American and British. So I forced myself to get familiar with British accent. To be honest, I find the British accent more elegant now. It sounds posh. Thank you for listening to me. Have a nice day.
Thank you. It is Sheniz from Turkey. Thank you very much for your message. Any comments, Reza?
Yes, what a lovely message. Thank you, Sheniz. And you've got a really good accent, which was the main kind of topic or one of the main topics of your conversation. You've good pronunciation. And I would say your accent has definitely been influenced by American English. Would you say so, Craig?
I agree with you. Her accent's very clear. She speaks very well, very easy to understand. Lovely expressions like I forced myself to get familiar with, etc. I'm not sure if it's typically, I would say, with American sounding. I think it's quite neutral, but it was very, very easy to understand. And her comment mainly was how she listens to English and different accents, being brought up with more of an American accent that she hears, and then later to hear more Australian English. Do we sound posh? I never thought of myself as posh, having an English accent.
For me, some British accents sound posh, but not all. Because, of course, Shanice, it depends which British accent. There's more than one. Remember, Britain includes, or the United Kingdom includes, Scotland, Wales, England, Northern Ireland, and not everyone in England speaks the same. In the north of England, they speak quite differently to the southeast or southwest. So for me, a certain type of accent, which tends to be from the south or southeast of English, can sound posh, but the others not especially. What do you think?
Yeah, some are neutral, aren't they? Especially from the north of England. And inside the southern part of the UK, London, you can get posh-sounding accents. People who go to public schools, people who speak like the BBC, for example. And from my area, then you can get accents that definitely don't sound posh from areas like Essex and south of the river. But one or two comments about your message, Shanice. You said listening to, which was very, very good, but then you forgot the to when you repeated listening. You said listening your podcast. Remember that too. That's a very common mistake. Anything else, Reza?
Yes, I think you said, Shanice, I exposure to. I think I know what you mean. I think you want to say I was exposed to. So we need a passive verb. Yeah, not active. You didn't expose anything. You were exposed to something. So I was exposed to different accents.
And thanks very much for sending us your message, Shanice.
Yes, forgive my pronunciation. Teshakur ederim, Shanice.
What's that?
I think I've just said thank you very much.
Okay, well, we'll know when Shanice replies. It sounded good to me. We'll see. Next, we have another voice message from longtime listener and friend of the show and AIRC482, Alberto from Australia.
Hi, Craig and Reza. This is Alberto from Australia. How are you guys going? I hope you are well despite the heat wave that Europe and Africa are suffering. First of all, again, I want to say thank you for all the work you are putting into the podcasts. Lately, you guys have been talking about personal subjects like the moral dilemmas or the manias episodes, which I personally like them. So, I came with an idea. How about if you talk about your personal experience as expats living in Spain? I happily living in this country for around 10 years already, and I have gone through several stages, from losing my confidence to being able to keep on a phone conversation, which apart from understanding jokes, I think it is one of the most difficult parts of speaking different languages than your mother tongue. Well, thanks for all and keep your great vibes that you guys have. Cheers, Alberto.
Always a pleasure to hear from our friend Alberto in Australia. Did you notice the way he said Australia?
Yeah, you said Australia in a really Australian way. It was funny.
Yeah. Yeah, another word I noticed, Alberto, that you said with Spanish pronunciation was mania. We would say mania in English, mania.
And isn't that a coincidence that Shanice in the previous message was talking about Australian accents, about how she has an exam which features Australian accents?
Yeah. Finally, Alberto, at the end, you said thanks for all, which might be a translation from the Spanish gracias por todo. I would say thanks for everything. I think that's more common. And thanks for everything. Thanks for everything you do. And thank you for your kind words and your idea for today's podcast. I think it would be interesting to speak about life as an expat. You've been there for 10 years. Reza and I have been in Spain for quite a long time. So let's discuss it and look at some advantages and disadvantages for anyone who might be living abroad in another country and working there, or might be thinking about doing it. We have spoken about living abroad before, haven't we, Reza? Do you remember that?
I do. I remember a really nice episode we had when we asked Emilia and Nick and their daughter Lucia some questions about living abroad in general. It wasn't specifically their experience as expats. It was about living abroad in general because they'd lived in various countries. And Craig, where can listeners find that episode?
They can go to inglespodcast.com/291 or on your podcast player, just search for 291. We've also spoken about working abroad before. That was episode 303. So inglespodcast.com/303. And we won't go into too much detail because we've already spoken about advantages of working abroad and the drawbacks or the disadvantages. But we'll remind you and go down the list quickly. If you want more detail, go and listen to that episode and we will expand on these points. So can you list quite quickly, Reza, the advantages of working abroad that we spoke about previously?
Well, as a listener to this podcast, I imagine top of your list or very near the top of your list should be the fact that you're going to improve your English and take it to the next level, just like what we hope to do in this podcast. And we'll be honest, although this podcast is fantastic, we hope, and very effective, there's nothing like actually going and living in a country where they speak English. That is the very best thing you can possibly do.
Of course, it's that 100% immersion, immersing yourself inside the language, hearing it every day, speaking it every day. There is nothing better for your English. Another advantage, knowledge of other local customs, the way people work in different countries, the way they have of doing things, meal times, for example. Lots of things are different from your culture and your way of life. Another thing is gaining insight, which means noticing, becoming aware of certain dynamics, not only in the workplace, but the way people live, the food they eat, the siesta time in Spain might be different from your country. So you get insights and you learn about people, the way people live on a day-to-day basis.
And of course, there's the independence. I did my very first TEFL job in Ankara in Turkey, and it was a great experience for many reasons. But above all, apart from the great food, the great culture, the lovely people, just living on my own. It was the first time I got the chance to live on my own, look after myself. I was responsible for paying the rent, for washing the clothes, for getting things done. It was a great experience in getting to know myself, to becoming an independent adult.
I agree, absolutely, yeah. The same thing for me. When I was 19, I left my parents' house to go traveling, and I really did learn a lot about myself and how to be independent. I think that's very important.
There's also the broader awareness, the understanding of what you can find of the world and its variety of people and cultures. And you discover things that you didn't know. For example, when I first went to Turkey, my first ever job, I thought, okay, so Turkey is a country full of Turkish people where everybody speaks Turkish. Yeah, it's more complicated than that. It turns out that there's quite a lot of people from other ethnic backgrounds there. There's some Kurdish people who are Turkish, but at the same time, they have their own kind of different cultures. And the same in Spain, Craig. Did you know when you came to Spain that it was going to be so regionalistic?
No, I had no idea, because previously I'd only been to the holiday resorts. And when I got to know Spain by traveling around, I realized every region has its personality, its food, its weather, its atmosphere. So very, very different. And yeah, you find that when you live in a country for a long time. And also, generally speaking, I think people don't like change very much. I think maybe you're more flexible when you're younger. You accept change a lot more easily. But traveling, living abroad, working abroad, getting used to different customs and cultures makes you more adaptable and makes you accept change a lot easier.
And one other little thing, or maybe it could be a big thing, many people might find you really interesting just because you're a foreigner. So you're not normal there, you're interesting. So, hey, it can be nice to be the center of attention in a positive way. Take advantage of it, enjoy it.
Let's take a quick break here, because I know you listen to this podcast to take your English to the next level. But what about your speaking? Is your fluency improving? Are you happy with your speaking skills? My conversation course focuses on making you a more confident and more fluent English speaker. You'll join me and a small group of motivated students, and we'll meet on Zoom and have topical discussions, role plays, debates, and presentations that will expand your vocabulary and help you express yourself effectively in English. So be proactive and take the first step towards becoming a confident and fluent English speaker. send me an email today to craig@inglespodcast.com and I'll send you details of the next online conversation course. Thanks for listening. Now, let's get back to the podcast. But of course, it's not all chocolates and roses. There are some drawbacks and disadvantages. Obviously, you miss friends and family and maybe food, comfort food that you really like eating from your home country. And you may experience some culture shock because you're going to adapt to new culture and customs. You might feel a bit like a fish out of water. That expression means everything's strange to you. You don't feel comfortable. You're not in your environment. You're a fish out of water.
Yes, because of the culture shock, the difficulty of adapting to new culture and customs. You're not used to it. It's going to take time. Another thing is the red tape. Now, don't worry, there aren't countries where they put red sellotape all over the place. Not that we know of. There's no strange custom of that.
Maybe in China.
Maybe, yeah, that's true. They do like red designs and patterns everywhere. No, it's a metaphorical expression. So red tape means bureaucracy. Bureaucracy, dealing with government, civil service to get things done. This can be a disadvantage. Some countries, more than others, have a lot of red tape. You have to get work visas, residence permits, all sorts of things, and it can take a long time. In fact, I seem to remember many years ago, 25 years ago, when I went to Turkey, there was quite a lot of red tape then to get a work permit. Maybe it's easier now, I don't know. Things have tended to get easier all around the world, but I imagine there are certain countries where it's still quite difficult.
Well, it was quite difficult in Spain when we arrived here in 1997. For you, 1998, there was difficulties with getting certain permissions, getting a driving license, for example. I think it has improved a lot over the last 25 years, but there's still some problems sometimes with bureaucracy and red tape here.
Actually, Craig, I have to correct you. I didn't get to Spain in 1998. I don't want to let down my listeners who know about me from Salamanca and Cáceres.
Oh, right.
I got to Valencia in 1998.
My
I've
apologies.
been here ever since. But I actually went first to Extremadura and then Salamanca. So I got here in 1995.
Oh, so you beat me. You got here before.
5, 6, 7. Or maybe 1994, actually. I think it was 1994. Yeah, I was in Turkey before that. Yeah, can you imagine how young I was?
Yeah.
1994 in Spain. And I've just remembered in Cáceres when I did the work permit, this is true. I've just remembered this. It arrived 2 weeks before it expired. And I'm not joking. It's something that just blew my mind. I had to wait about...
What does blew my mind mean?
I just couldn't believe it. My mind wanted to explode. In the past, you got the first one for just 3 months. And then afterwards, you got a longer one for 9 months or something. I can't remember. So it took 2.5 months to get there. And then it expired 2 weeks later. And then I had to get another one. I only actually had it in my possession for 2 weeks, honestly. So red tape was not easy in Spain in those days.
That's crazy. But that does explain to me why your Spanish is better than mine. You've been here 3 years longer.
Oh, yeah. I wouldn't say I'm exactly Cervantes myself.
Those 3 years, that's the difference. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking with it. Now, you can also be exploited as a foreign worker, an expat in another country. This is a problem. This could be a problem. You might be paid a lower salary than nationals from the country, and you might not get promotion easily. And I know someone who is working as a biologist in Cambridge, and although they have a very good job, people who are British have been promoted above my friend because he is Spanish and he's not a national of the UK. So that can happen. And it's something I think you just have to accept and learn to live with, that in some cases you might be exploited, you might not get the same treatment as somebody from that country.
We mentioned earlier as an advantage the excitement and fun and learning experience of the new culture that you'll be getting to know. But then there's the downside, the drawback. It takes longer to get used to foreign ways of doing things. There's certain ways that things are done just because that's the way they're done in certain countries. And in other countries, they're done another way. You don't adapt immediately to that. It takes time. You have to learn from your mistakes. For example, you're going to meet some Spanish friends for a meal. Well, first of all, there's a good chance they arrive half an hour or an hour late. And then you might think it will take you 45 minutes to eat the meal. No, it might take you 2 hours to eat the meal. They take time over certain things that British people do much quicker.
And the food might not necessarily be as hot as we'd expect it in the UK, right, Reza?
Yeah, the number of conversations we've had about hot plates and cold plates. I've just come from Belfast and I had many, many meals where the plates were specifically preheated before they were put on my table. It's very, very common.
And that was the middle of summer?
Yep, middle of summer.
You might also have to deal with racist discrimination from some people. Now, I can't think of any circumstances where I've been discriminated against for being British here in Spain, but I have seen it. I have seen it at government offices where immigrants from other countries have been discriminated against for racial reasons. So that's another aspect, isn't it?
Yeah. It doesn't happen to many people, thank goodness, but, be on the lookout for it and try to avoid it if you are in that situation.
So let's move on to look at some vocabulary connected to being an expat or an immigrant in another country. And let's start there because they are quite similar words, aren't they, Reza? An expat and an immigrant. Is there a difference?
It's very hard to pinpoint. Pinpoint is to say exactly what the difference is. It's more kind of a notion, a vague idea.
Because they both live outside their native country, right?
Yeah, and basically an expat is an immigrant, but it's a specific kind of immigrant. Would you agree?
I would. A lot of expats tend to move abroad and work abroad for professional reasons or maybe to retire. And also I think with an expat, there is that idea that maybe one day they will return to their native country. Whereas when I think of an immigrant, it sounds more permanent to me. Do you agree with that?
Yes. Yeah, the duration is one thing. And the motivation is certainly another. Why are some people less likely to return? Well, because maybe they don't have much to return to from the countries they've come from. If you're from a developed, wealthy country, you can always go back. They might have a good health service. Crime is relatively low. Not too much obvious corruption. But maybe the weather's terrible. Does that sound like anywhere you know?
I could identify with that, yeah.
So it wouldn't be the end of the world just to have to put up with, a lot of rain, for example, in the UK if we went back. So we could go back. But imagine you've come from Afghanistan or something like that. Well, obviously they have a lot of problems and you would have to seriously think about going back.
Yeah. And looking at the word immigrant, you have the word migrant as well, which is a person who moves from one place to another, probably to find work or maybe better living conditions, a better life. And you hear the word migrants used a lot in the news these days.
Another thing, although we've kind of mentioned it already in a way, in passing, is nationality. I said that you might not be so motivated to go back because what you've left behind in your original country wasn't great. Could be your personal circumstances, or it could be the country itself. For example, there's a lot of Algerian and Moroccan immigrants living in Spain. I know quite a few of them. they're not considered expats. They're not expats from Morocco or Algeria. But a lot of British people, and I've met plenty of them who live in the Costa Blanca, Costa del Sol, they've been living here a long time, maybe the same length of time as a Moroccan that I also know. But I consider the British person more an expat because of what we said earlier. There's more chance that they might go back to the UK. They're here, yes, but they're able to bring quite a lot of their customs with them. They'll know other expats. They're not forced to adapt as much. They can if they want, but they could speak English most of the day in certain parts of the Costa Blanca or Costa del Sol. Much harder for a Moroccan or an Algerian to be successful if they don't adapt. Yes, they have their own communities, but if they don't adapt to Spanish culture, economically, socially, it's more difficult for them to go up in the world. It's not so difficult for an expat, for a British person. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's very true, and that's a very good point. Now, when people get married, they tend to have a holiday to be together. It's called a honeymoon. And when you first arrive in your chosen country as an expat or an immigrant, there's something called the honeymoon period, which is a time when everything is fantastic. Everything is beautiful. Oh, the food's fantastic. What a lovely place. Nothing is bad. Reza, how long did your honeymoon period in Valencia last?
It lasted
days or months?
Actually, years.
Really?
But there was a time when I actually went back to the UK to live. So really, you could say that I've been a classic example of an expat because I could and I did go back to live in the UK because I was offered what seemed to be a pretty good job and I was a bit tired of Valencia. The honeymoon period was definitely over. I guess it had already been over a couple of years before that. So we're talking about after about 8 years.
Really?
I was beginning to see a lot of the negative sides of Valencia. For example, there's often a lot of noise in Valencia, much noisier than other similar size cities.
That's true.
Don't know how people manage to make so much noise here, but they do. And I was getting a bit tired of the incredibly hot summers, although I did like the climate the rest of the time, and a few other things. So for me, I would say it was years. It was 7 or 8 years, but the honeymoon period did end for me, and I did go back to the UK. And then guess what? The honeymoon period of going back to my own country, that ended after a couple of years. I thought, okay, I'm going back to Valencia again. It's really not that bad.
So it's almost like you got married twice to Valencia.
Yeah.
Mine lasted about a year, I think. After a year, I started becoming more integrated into the society. I learned Spanish, I learned the language. And I think along with learning the language and working for a while, then you start to see maybe some negative sides to life in another country. And then the honeymoon period comes to an end. But I remember the first year was amazing because the bars didn't close. In England, the pubs closed at a certain time. But here, yeah, you could go out all night. It was fantastic.
Yeah, you've just made me think about understanding the language and you know what's going on. That's right. It was before I got to Valencia because I lived for 3 years in Spain before here. When I arrived, I didn't have any Spanish at all. But whenever I got to understand the expression, sí, resta del dinero en negro. Hold on, I'm not sure I've understood this part. I kind of regretted having enough Spanish today and understand that. It was like, okay, I see how it works.
For people who don't speak Spanish, that means, yeah, we'll pay you some salary, but the most of your salary, the rest will be paid in black money under the table illegally. And that happened to me as well.
I'm not saying that I accepted such work, but it was offered. It was offered to me.
Same here. Same thing happened to me at an interview. Now, if you do live abroad for a while, then you'll probably get a bit homesick. Homesickness is the noun, and that's when you miss certain things about your home country. Now, it's a lot easier these days keeping in touch with family and friends using the internet and Zoom and Skype, etc. But I remember when I first came here, I was quite homesick, and living abroad, that can be a problem, missing family and friends.
So we've already mentioned the language barrier, but it's related to some other topics we'd like to talk about: adaptation and integration. And then finally, assimilation. So if you don't have the language, you've got a problem with all three of those. But even if you do have the language, there's the cultural aspect. You've got to adapt to Spanish timetables. In the UK, before we came here, we were used to eating at our lunch at about 12:30, 1, I guess, 1:30. That'd be early here. Could be 1:30 to 3 to 3:30. So your stomach just doesn't suddenly change. It just doesn't suddenly say, oh, I'm not hungry anymore at 12:30. I'll wait till 3:30. No. Your tummy starts rumbling at 12:30, as it always has. That's your lunchtime. But no, you got to wait. You got to wait another 2 hours or 3 hours for your lunch. So it takes time to adapt, don't you think?
It does, yeah, especially at weekends when it's not uncommon to see people having dinner at 11, 12 o'clock at night, and that would be unheard of where I grew up in the UK. So as Reza said, there's adaptation, to adapt, that's the verb, to adapt to a new lifestyle, integration, to integrate into another way of living, another culture, and assimilation, to assimilate into another lifestyle.
I found, as far as integration goes, that I integrated fairly quickly in Valencia with Spanish people. I was probably helped by the fact that I'd lived in another part of Spain before. But one thing I do remember distinctly, most of the Spanish people who became friends or good acquaintances first were not Valencian in Valencia. So in a way, they were in a similar position to me. They were from Teruel, they were from Andalusia, they
different
were
parts
Catalans.
of Spain.
Yeah, so they were kind of in a similar position, and I integrated more quickly into circles of non-Valencian Spanish people than Valencians in Valencia first. Did that happen to you?
Yeah, also with other expats. In my honeymoon year, the first year, I also settled in with a group of similar people who had also moved here. So that phrasal verb to settle in means to feel comfortable with a group of people, to feel comfortable where you are, to settle in. And there's another phrasal verb that's quite similar, settle down. And to settle down somewhere means to feel good in one place. So maybe you move around a lot, you change cities, you change countries, but you find a place you like and you stay there and you're happy. You've settled down. You can also settle down and start a family, or settle down and move in with a partner.
And hopefully around about the time you settle in or settle down, or maybe slightly before or after that, then you will begin to blend in. That's another phrasal verb. A blend of something is a mixture. So we talk about a blend of coffee. So they get 2 or 3 different types, and then they mix it all together and you got one coffee.
Whiskey as well.
Whiskey as well, other things. But it has several ingredients. Well, if you blend in, that means, okay, you're not an original Spaniard, but you now don't look so foreign. You've blended in. In other words, you no longer stick out or stand out. Before, it was obvious, very obvious, that you weren't Spanish when you first got here. For me anyway, I guess it was the same for you. You stood out, that you didn't speak much Spanish, you weren't quite familiar about customs, opening hours, etc., what food to ask for. You stood out. But then eventually, whenever people don't notice so much that you're a foreigner, then you're blending in.
If you want to see these words written, there's a list of vocabulary in the show notes. Go to inglespodcast.com/482 and you can read the words that we're speaking about. Now, you can also go outside your comfort zone when you move abroad. To step outside your comfort zone or go outside your comfort zone means to be in a situation that you're not necessarily comfortable in. Now, that very often is a good thing because you're learning, you're expanding your horizons, you're getting new experiences. So an expression I really like to remind myself of when I'm going outside my comfort zone is feel the fear and do it anyway. Sometimes you grow as a person when you put yourself in uncomfortable positions, like moving abroad, for example.
And to go outside your comfort zone, you're going to have to learn the ropes. Don't worry, you don't have to become an expert in ropes like, let's say, a fireman probably does.
Or a fisherman. I think it comes from
fisherman.
the sea, doesn't it?
It's to do with the sea, I think, from sailors.
Yeah.
So in the years when there were no motors and boats, they were all powered by the wind, sailing boats. Ropes were essential, and there were many, 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 many different ropes, all with different purposes. And if you did the wrong thing with the wrong rope, you could make the boat sink. So you had to learn the ropes, know how those ropes worked. So now it's an expression which means learn how things work. So you got to step outside your comfort zone and you have to learn the ropes.
An expression we had before, but we'll repeat it here, is to be a fish out of water. Now, that's when you first arrive in a foreign country. You haven't settled in yet. You certainly haven't settled down, and you haven't blended in. So you feel a bit uncomfortable. Everything seems strange to you. You're a fish out of water.
But if you do finally settle in and you stay here, at least for a while, you'll probably have to apply for residency for legal reasons. Well, certainly if you're a British person now in Spain, you have to apply for residency if you're going to be here for a while, because the UK in 2023, when we record this, is no longer part of the EU. So a British person must apply for and hopefully successfully obtain residency in Spain to stay a long period of time. Before that, we didn't have to. It was useful, but as British people, when we were in the EU, you didn't have to have residency. You could just come and stay as long as you like on your European passport. But if you got a job here and you want to settle in and open a bank account and be paid, even in the past, when it wasn't obligatory, it was a good idea to obtain residency, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And also you can apply for another status, which is citizenship. Notice the different nouns there. So residency is the noun for to be a resident, and citizenship, SHIP, is the noun for to be a citizen of a country. Is that something you've thought about, Reza? Because you have residency, but like me, you don't have citizenship here.
Yeah, so I am a resident of Spain, and so are you, Craig, right?
Yeah.
Officially, we live here, and we have, I think, pretty much means more or less all the rights of a Spanish person because we are officially legally resident here. Other British people don't, by the way. A British person who's come here for 3 months or 4 months, but they haven't applied for residency, they don't have the same rights, actually, as Craig and I, because we are residents.
We have the right and the privilege to pay Spanish tax.
Yes, what a privilege it is, I must
How
say.
lucky we are.
I could go into a long story. We have the right to do a job and then not be paid for about 9 months waiting to be paid. But I won't go into that story.
That'll take another 2 hours, I think.
What was I going to say? Yes, citizenship. Here's the thing. Every country does what they like. We're talking about Spain. In Spain, there are only very, very few, very special circumstances where they permit dual nationality or citizenship. It's the same thing. You can't be British and Spanish. You could be Spanish if you wanted, Craig, and me too, but you would have to give up your British citizenship. That's a requirement. So that's the problem.
That's true. And I did consider it when Brexit was happening, but so far it hasn't really affected me that much. So I don't think I will be applying for citizenship, at least in the near future. We'll see what happens further down the line. Well, I wonder how Alberto feels living in Australia. What motivated you, Alberto, to move abroad in the first place and go to Australia, and other people listening who have emigrated and moved to other countries to live and work? What motivated you to come here, Reza?
a mixture of culture and geography. I like the idea that it was a Mediterranean country, and to have independence. Those three things. What about you?
Very similar. Independence, probably curiosity to see what life would be like here, and maybe a sense of adventure, wanting to get outside of my comfort zone and living in another environment. Also, my family had moved here a year previously, so that's another big reason. What was the hardest thing you had to deal with when you first arrived? Do you remember?
Without any doubt, language, because I didn't have a word of Spanish. No, I tell a lie. I had about 5 words of Spanish. Un, dos, tres, agua, buenos dias, and gracias, something like that. And I learned them thanks to Sesame Street. And I'm not joking. Do you remember that program, Sesame Street?
I do. Estoy aquí. Ahora estoy ahí. Estoy ahí o aquí? No, estoy aquí.
That's all I knew. I tell a lie. One other program helped me to learn a completely useless word in Spain, but I thought it might be useless. Can you guess?
Ayuntamiento?
No. Ándale. From Speedy Gonzales. So I thought ándale would be useful. So as soon as I got the chance, hi, yeah, ándale. And people are like, what the hell are you talking about?
I think that's more Mexican Spanish.
Know, but I thought it might be useful. It wasn't useful.
Yeah, I can remember looking for a flat, a place to live in my honeymoon, my first month here. My first month, I lived in a hostel for 2 weeks and got fleas, which are pulgas in Spanish. So I didn't have a very good couple of weeks initially. And going to try and rent a flat with having hardly any Spanish and trying to communicate was really, really hard, really tough. So have you gone through any definitive particular phases?
Yeah, well, I definitely...
Stages?
Yeah, I definitely had the honeymoon period. And then I had the settling in period, which involved a little bit of acceptance of certain things I didn't like.
And that came with the language. Yeah.
The language understanding. Like then a period of getting a bit tired of Valencia and thinking, it's very noisy. Ireland wasn't as noisy. It's too hot in the summer. Ireland wasn't so hot in the summer. And then trying out, going back to the UK and then remembering, okay, it's not too hot in the summer, but it's too cold here in Belfast.
And too wet.
Too wet, so Valencia. And it's true, it's not that noisy, but, you know, I can put up with a little bit of noise for the good things.
What does put up with mean?
To put up with, to tolerate. I can tolerate the noise for all the good things about Valencian culture.
Yeah, the same here. And then obviously I moved to the final stage for me, which was meeting my wife, and then the stability that comes with a steady relationship and settling down with her and making a home and deciding to stay here. So let's summarize, Reza. What are the best and worst things for you about living here now after so many years?
So if we're talking specifically about Valencia, the weather most of the time, with the exception of July and August, which are too hot, but the rest of the year it's great. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's definitely on my list.
Also, a thing which is very important in my life, food. I do like my food, and Valencia is a superb place to live when it comes to food, not only to eat out, but also if you like cooking at home. It has a variety of ingredients which are second to none. That means they can't be beaten. Anything you can possibly think of, they've got it here in Valencia, and good quality and abundant. Would you agree with that as well?
Yeah, I wouldn't put food right at the top of my list. I do enjoy the food here, but it wouldn't be like a real reason to stay as far as I'm concerned. I also thought of the social services, the fact that the health service is very good here. I think in the UK, it depends very much on the area where you live, if you get good healthcare in hospitals and doctors. And also the economy, because you can live here fairly cheaply. It's definitely cheaper than the UK. I was in London in May this year, and I found it really, really expensive. So you have to earn a much higher salary in the UK to be able to have a similar standard of living. And I think Valencia is still cheaper than Barcelona and Madrid.
Yes, it's funny you should mention that. I saw a story on the TV news when I was back in the UK about the working poor in the UK at the minute. This concept doesn't really exist in Valencia, Spain. We're talking about people on full-time jobs, working full-time and living in tents in London because they can't afford accommodation.
Like camping tents.
Yeah, like in people's gardens.
Wow.
But they have a full-time job.
Where do they shower? Where do they eat?
Usually friends help them out. So they have a tent, sometimes with kids and, partners. And they're working full-time. They're paying their taxes. They're contributing into society. But they can't afford any kind of accommodation in London at all. That really shocked me.
Yeah, that is shocking. What are your negatives?
I miss a British sense of humor. So it's nice whenever I meet up with other British people. Yeah, but with Spanish people, sometimes humor doesn't quite work the same. Although the Spanish have a great sense of humor as well, but it's different, isn't it? It's not the same as British humor.
Yeah, I know what you mean. When I get together with friends in the UK, it does seem a lot more natural and a lot more familiar. And although I'm comfortable here in Spanish company, I agree it's not quite the same. And obviously it's a different language that you're speaking in and making jokes in. So I don't think it can ever be the same as your mother tongue. And now it's your turn to practice your English. Have you ever lived and worked abroad? If you have, we would like to hear about it. And if you haven't done it yet, which country would you like to move to? And what would you like to do there? We would love to hear from you, practice some of this vocabulary, and tell us what you think. You can send us a voice message. Go to speakpipe.com. That's speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. There's a link in the show notes at inglespodcast.com/482. Reza, how can people contact us by email?
If you prefer to write, you could write to these addresses, craig@inglespodcast.com or belfastreza@gmail.com.
This podcast is sponsored in part by mansioningles.com. Visit the Mansion Ingles online store and there you'll see some courses and products that will help you improve your English. Go to store.mansioningles.net.
As we do in all episodes, we'd like to thank our Patreon supporters. Patreon, that's Patreon. And what those people do is donate as little as $1.50 per month to the podcast. And as a way of saying thank you, they get instant access to the transcriptions. If you're interested, have a look at the link in the show notes. It's patreon.com/Inglespodcast.
And we don't have time, unfortunately, to thank each and every one of you individually, but we will say welcome and thank you to our latest Patreon supporters who joined recently, and they are Paula, Maria Alcantara Vargas, and Manuel Del. Thank you very much to you and to everybody who has joined our Patreon scheme. What's next week, Reza?
Next week, we've got tips and advice for the Cambridge B2 First, C1 Advanced and C2 Proficiency speaking tests.
So if you are about to take a speaking test in English of any kind, not only Cambridge, join us next week and get some tips and advice. Until then, thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful week. If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends so that more people can listen. And until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's bye-bye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.